There is a particular kind of attention you have been keeping for so long that you no longer remember when it began. It is the attention that enters a room before your body does. It reads the lamps, the small adjustments of furniture, the angle at which the door has been left, the temperature of the silence between two people who have just stopped speaking. By the time you have crossed the threshold, you already know whether you are safe in this room or whether you are not. You did not decide to know, you simply knew, and you have been knowing in this way, at this speed, with this accuracy for as long as you can remember. I want to begin here, in this room with you, on this exact form of knowing, because I have spent a great many years trying to understand what it is and where it comes from. And I want to say at the outset that almost everyone I have met who possessed this knowing also possessed a second thing, which they did not associate with the first. They possessed what they called anxiety. They named it, treated it, medicated it, spiritualized it, fought it. They did not see that the two were the same. The reading of the room and the racing of the heart were not two phenomena, they were one phenomenon, seen from two sides. Now let me be careful with what I am about to say, because the words can pass too quickly. The thesis I will be working toward over the next hours is this. What you have been calling anxiety is not, in its essence, a malfunction. It is not a nervous system gone wrong. It is not a chemical that needs correcting, nor a thought that needs replacing, nor a vibration that needs raising. It is memory. It is the body remembering with great precision a room you once lived inside, a room in which this particular form of vigilance was not a disorder, but a position, a post at which a young person was stationed because there was no one else who could be stationed there. I will return to this, but I want you to hear the shape of it now, even if it is not yet proven, because the rest of what I have to say only makes sense if you allow this possibility to sit in the room with us for a while, that what has been treated as your wound may be, more accurately, your assignment. Let me describe what I mean by the body remembering. You know the experience. Even if you have not named it this way, you are sitting at a table. Nothing in the present requires your alertness. The light is ordinary, the conversation is ordinary, and yet some part of you is already 2 steps ahead, already tracking the slight shift in someone's face, already noting that a tone has dropped, already preparing for an event that has not occurred and may never occur. Your hand has reached, without your asking it to reach, toward the stove of the present moment. It is being burned, but the fire is not in the present. The fire was lit a great many years ago, in a room you have not stood inside in decades, and your hand has continued to reach for it the way a hand reaches in sleep for a wound it can no longer find. This is not a figure of speech I am inventing for effect. This is a description of what the body actually does when it has been trained very early that certain conditions in a room, a particular silence, a particular smell, a particular angle of someone else's body meant that something was coming. The body learned the conditions. It learned them so well that the conditions no longer needed to be present in order to summon the response. The mind let go of the original room. The body did not. The body kept the room and built every subsequent room on top of it. So when you walk into a perfectly ordinary kitchen and feel the floor tilt, what you are experiencing is not paranoia, it is not overreaction. It is a perfectly accurate response to the wrong room. The accuracy is not the problem. The accuracy is what has kept you alive. The problem, if we must call it a problem at all, is only that the room your accuracy is reading is not the room you are currently standing inside. There is more here, but I want to slow down first, because I find that the listeners who most need this distinction are often the ones least able to receive it at the moment of first hearing. And the reason is this: they have been told for so long that their experience is something gone wrong inside them that they cannot, at first, hear the suggestion that it might be something done well, even brilliantly, in response to something that was actually happening to them, to their childhood home, to the particular configuration of adults and children and atmospheres that arranged itself around their earliest years. Hear me. I am not saying that the conditions of your early life were necessarily extreme. I have known many people whose childhoods, by any external standard, would be called ordinary, even fortunate, and who nevertheless developed this particular form of attention because the household required of them, at some level too quiet to be remembered, a kind of constant atmospheric reading. It might have been a parent whose mood was unreliable, even mildly so. It might have been a marriage in which the unspoken was louder than the spoken. It might have been a sibling whose distress shaped the family's center of gravity. It might have been an absence so polite that no one ever named it. The household does not need to have been violent for the body to have been recruited into vigilance. The household only needs to have been one in which someone, and that someone was you, was required to know things that no one was willing to say aloud. This is what I mean by a post. I want to give that word its full weight, because I will return to it many times in what follows. A post is not a personality. A post is not a temperament. A post is a position at which a person is stationed in order to perform a function the larger system requires but cannot openly assign. Soldiers are stationed at posts. Watchmen are stationed at posts. The person stationed at a post is responsible for something the rest of the household is permitted to forget. The household sleeps. The watchman does not. And here is what is essential, what I want you to hold close. No one ever told the watchman the war was over. You were placed at a post. The household, for whatever reason, required someone to keep watch. Perhaps it required you to read the parent's mood so that the parent's mood could be managed, absorbed, preempted. Perhaps it required you to read the silence between two adults so that you could position yourself, your needs, your small body, in such a way that you did not become an additional weight in an already loaded room. Perhaps it required you to know, before anyone said so, what would happen if a certain word were spoken at the dinner table. You learned to know. You learned so well that the knowing became indistinguishable from yourself. And then this is what almost no one notices. The household ended. The house was left. The parents grew old, or died, or remained the same, but became less central. The original conditions dissolved. The post, however, was never struck. No one came to relieve you. The order to stand down was never issued, so you have been standing, watch, all these years, in the assumption that the watch was still required, and every room you enter, your body interprets through the framework of the room you were originally watching. Every silence is the silence of that first room. Every shifting mood is the shifting mood of that first room. Every threshold you cross is, in some hidden way, the threshold of a door that was closed a very long time ago. This is what I am asking you to consider, that the symptom you have called pathology was never pathology. It was loyalty, astonishing, exhausting, lifelong loyalty performed by a part of you that was given a job before it was old enough to refuse the job, and that has never been formally told that the job is finished. I want to be careful here. I am not saying you are wrong to want relief. I am not saying the body's continued vigilance is something to be celebrated as if it were merely a beautiful quality of yours. The cost has been real. The years of compressed shoulders, the meals not tasted, the rooms not entered, the relationships approached as though they were rooms. One was reading rather than rooms. One was living inside. These are not nothing. The cost has been your life, in the sense that a great deal of your life has been spent inside the activity of the watch rather than inside whatever was actually occurring on the other side of the watch. But the cost is not what I want you to look at first. If you look at the cost first, you will move immediately into one of the two responses I have seen. Take people away from the deeper recognition I am trying to lead them toward. You will move into grievance, or you will move into self-improvement. You will become angry at the household that placed you at the post, and the anger is not wrong. But it is not yet the thing, or you will redouble your effort to dismantle the post, to manage your way out of it, to optimize your nervous system into release, and the optimization will not work because the watchman is not a malfunction that can be optimized. The watchman is a young person who took on a duty that was not theirs to bear, and who has been bearing it faithfully, in the dark, without recognition, for the entirety of the decades you have called your adult life. What that young person requires is not a better technique. What that young person requires is to be seen, to be named, to be told in language they can understand that the war is over and that they are permitted to walk inside the house. They have been guarding all this time. That telling is not a moment of insight. It is not something that happens once and concludes. It is the slow, careful, sometimes years-long process of bringing into the daylight what has been performing its work in the dark. And it begins, this is what I want you to hear, in the closing minutes of this first hour. It begins not with the dismantling of the post, but with the recognition that the post existed, that someone has been standing at it, and that the someone is you. There is a moment in the lives of those who reach this recognition when the body does something it has not done in a great many years. It pulls, not because the threat has passed. The body has long since stopped distinguishing between presence and absence of threat, but because, for the first time, the body is heard by the very mind that has been treating it as a problem. The pause is small, You might not notice it the first time it happens, but something has shifted. The watchman has been spoken to. The watchman has not yet been relieved. That is the work of all the hours that follow, but the watchman has been acknowledged, and in a life that has been organized around being unseen at the very point of one's most constant labor, acknowledgement is not a small event. This is the threshold I want to bring you to in this opening. Not yet across, only to the edge, so that the rest of what I have to say about how this got mistranslated, about what the deeper structure actually is, about what it costs to keep performing the work without naming it, and about what becomes possible when the post is at last relieved, will have something to settle into, a foundation that I have laid and that you have, by the very act of staying with me this long, already begun to lay yourself. 5:17 p.m. Claude responded. Now I want to turn to the matter of mistranslation, because almost everything that has been done with this experience in the last century, the diagnosis, now I want to turn to the matter of mistranslation, because almost everything that has been done with this experience in the last century, the diagnoses, the technique, the spiritualities, the self-help has been done in a language that does not quite fit what is actually happening. And the misfit is not innocent. The wrong language does not merely fail to help, it actively prevents the recognition that would help, because it directs the attention to the wrong place and asks the wrong question of the symptom. Let me describe the three mistranslations I have most often encountered, so that you can see your own experience pass through them and emerge, I hope, intact on the other side. The first mistranslation is the diagnostic one. It is the most respectable, the most institutional, and the most difficult to argue with in polite company. It says, in effect, that your vigilance is a condition. It has a name. The name belongs in a manual. The manual was assembled by careful people who have studied a great many cases and found that certain symptoms cluster together, and these clusters can be given names, and the names can guide treatment. There is nothing wrong with this enterprise as far as it goes. I have great respect for what careful observation can accomplish, but, and here is where I must be precise, the diagnostic name treats the symptom as though it began in you, as though something in your particular biology, your particular chemistry, your particular wiring went somewhat off, and the going off is the matter to be addressed. The framework presumes the trouble to be local to you, local to your nervous system, local to your brain. The trouble was not local to you. The trouble was located in a room, and you were placed inside the room, and the only thing local to you was the response that was required of someone placed inside that room. The response is not the trouble. The room was the trouble. And to treat the response as though it were the original event is to mistake the echo for the voice that called. I am not telling you to refuse the help that comes through diagnostic language. I am telling you only this: do not let the name of your symptom convince you that you are the place where the trouble began. You are the place where the trouble was finally registered. You are the instrument that recorded it. The instrument is not the cause of the sound. The second mistranslation is the self-help one. It is gentler than the diagnostic and in some ways more dangerous because it appears to honor your interiority while in fact it asks you to rearrange the furniture of an outer house while saying nothing about the inner one. It tells you about routines, it tells you about boundaries, it tells you about morning practices and breath and what to put in your body and what to remove from your schedule. Some of this is useful. I do not dismiss it. The body is helped by good sleep and the absence of those substances that disturb it. But no amount of rearranging the outer house will silence what is happening inside an inner one. The inner room is not made of routines. The inner room is made of unfinished events. And unfinished events are not addressed by the addition of new habits. They are addressed by the slow, frightening, dignified work of being allowed at last to finish. I have watched a great many earnest people work year after year on the outer rearrangement and arrive at 50 or 60 with a beautifully organized life and the same watchman standing at the same post inside. They had done everything that was asked of them. They had improved themselves diligently. They had become, by every external measure, healthier, calmer, more disciplined people, and yet, in the quiet of their own evenings, the old reading of the room continued, because the old reading was never about routine. It was about a room that no morning practice could enter. The third mistranslation is the one I encounter most often now, and the one I find most painful to address, because it borrows the language of depth without performing the labor of depth. It is the framework that calls your vigilance a gift, that names you a sensitive soul, that explains your reading of the room as the privileged access of a finer instrument to dimensions that coarser people miss. I do not deny that some people are more porous than others. I have always been one of them, but I want to say something difficult here. And I want you to stay with me, because I think this distinction matters more than most. What is being called sensitivity in this third framework is not sensitivity in the way the framework names it. It is not a gift bestowed on a finer soul. It is the residual organization of a child who had to develop a finer instrument because the room they were placed in required it. The instrument is real, the capacity is real, but the capacity is not a metaphysical decoration. It is, more accurately, the trace of a duty. The fineness of the instrument is the fineness it had to acquire to keep its small carrier safe. To call it a gift is to flatter what was originally a labor, and flattery is not the same as recognition. Flattery keeps the labor in place by celebrating it. Recognition allows the labor, finally, to be set down. This is the first place I want to give you a sharp distinction, and I want you to hold it carefully. What you have been calling sensitivity is, more precisely, sensitivity put to work. The sensitivity itself is not the question. The question is the contract. There was a contract, unspoken, never signed, never agreed to in any way a child could have refused. That required your sensitivity to be in continuous service to the management of someone else's interior. The household ended. The contract did not. You have been honoring a contract that was never yours to honor, in rooms whose inhabitants do not know the contract exists, and they wonder why you are tired. You are tired because you are working. The work is invisible because the work has never been named. I want to come, in a moment, to what I meant in a book I wrote long ago on the relationship between the ego and the unconscious. But before that, let me pause and say something about why these three mistranslations are so persistent, and why they keep returning even after one sees through them. They persist because each of them offers a small mercy. The diagnostic framework offers the mercy of locating the trouble somewhere it can be managed. The self-help framework offers the mercy of effort, the feeling that, if one only worked harder on oneself, the trouble would lift. The spiritual framework offers the mercy of meaning, the feeling that one's suffering is the cost of one's specialness. Each mercy is real. I do not mock any of them. I have used all three at different hours of my own life. But each mercy purchases its small comfort by displacing the actual matter. The actual matter is that something happened a long time ago, in rooms, most of which no longer exist, and the something installed in you a structure of attention that has been running faithfully in every room since. The actual matter cannot be diagnosed away, optimized away, or sanctified away. The actual matter can only be remembered, and the remembering is not pleasant, and it is not quick, and it does not produce a moment of triumphant clarity. The remembering produces a long, slow, almost geological shift in the floor of one's life. I want to put it more sharply. If the anxiety was loyalty, then you cannot fight it. You can only thank it. And the thanking is much harder than the fighting. I will say that again, because I find the words go past too quickly when one hears them for the first time. If the watchman has been keeping watch out of loyalty to a household that no longer exists, then no campaign you wage against the watchman can succeed, because the watchman is not your enemy. The watchman is the most faithful inhabitant of your interior. The watchman is the part of you who took the duty seriously when no one else would. You cannot oppose the watchman. You can only stand in front of the watchman in full daylight and tell the watchman what the watchman has been keeping watch for. And the telling will take you a long time, because the telling requires you to remember the room. In a book I wrote long ago on the relationship between the ego and the unconscious, I tried to set down something about how the conscious mind imagines itself to be the master of the house, when in fact it is, at best, one of several voices in a much larger household, and the voices it has refused to hear continue to act on its behalf in ways it does not perceive. I would say it differently today. I would say that the ego is not so much the master of the house as the resident who sleeps in the bright front room and assumes that the bright front room is the whole house. The watchman is in the back, in a room the resident has not visited. The watchman is awake. The watchman has been awake since 1934 or whatever year. In your own life, the household first issued the order that has never been rescinded. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. I said this many years ago, and I have not yet found a way to say it more accurately. What I meant, what I still mean is, that the parts of yourself you have not yet brought into the daylight will continue to act, and you will continue to mistake their actions for the simple shape of your life. You will say, "This is just how my body is." You will say, "This is just how I am in relationships." You will say, "This is just the kind of luck I have." The fate you describe is, in many cases, the patient continuing labor of an inner figure you have not yet learned to recognize. Now, I want to bring this around to the specific matter of what you have been calling anxiety, because I do not want to leave the recognition in the abstract. When the heart races at the kitchen table, when the body braces before a phone call that has not yet arrived, when the muscles in the shoulders tighten as the front door opens, these are not random firings of a misbehaving nervous system. These are the watchman reporting in. The watchman is saying, "This room contains the conditions I was trained to read." The conditions may have nothing to do with the actual people present. The conditions may be only the slant of the light, the time of day, the particular silence between two voices. The watchman does not care about the actual people present. The watchman is reading the conditions, and the conditions are the conditions of the original room. This is not malfunction. This is precision. It is precision applied to a target that no longer exists. And to call the precision a malfunction is to insult the part of you that learned very young and very thoroughly how to read a room in order to survive it. Here is the reframe I want you to take with you into the hours that follow. The anxiety is not what is wrong with you. The anxiety is what was right about you. In a room where being right was not safe, the wrongness was the room, the rightness was your response. And the response has continued because no one has ever told you that you may. At last, lower your hand. I will be careful. I am not promising you that the lowering of the hand will come quickly. I am not promising you that the watchman, once named, will leave the post the same week. The watchman has been there for decades. The watchman trusts very few voices. The watchman will need to hear the news many times before the news lands. But the first hearing is necessary. The first naming is necessary. Without it, you will continue to fight the watchman, and the fight will go badly, because you cannot win a war against the most faithful part of yourself. What I am leading you toward, slowly, is not a technique. I have no technique that will dismantle this structure for you in 7 days. What I am leading you toward is a different relation to the structure, a relation in which you are no longer in opposition to your own vigilance, but standing alongside it, the way one might stand alongside an elderly servant who has been working in the house for so long that they have forgotten anyone could ever be expected to relieve them. The servant does not need to be dismissed. The servant needs to be addressed by their name, with the recognition of what they have done, and then, slowly, and this is the work of years invited to sit down, I will turn next to the deeper mechanism, to the question of why this structure exists at all and what it has been protecting, and to the territory of family and inheritance that lies underneath all of this. But I want to leave you at the close of this second hour with the most important sentence I can offer at this stage of our conversation. The sentence is this: what you have been treating as your disorder is, more accurately, the most disciplined part of yourself, performing a job no one ever told it to stop performing. The disorder is not the disorder, the order, the rigorous, exhausting, lifelong order of the watch is the matter we must learn to see. 5:20 p.m. Claude responded. Now I want to descend a level further, into the architecture itself, because so far I have spoken of the watchman as though the watchman were a single figure S. Now I want to descend a level further, into the architecture itself, because so far I have spoken of the watchman as though the watchman were a single figure standing alone at a single post. The truth is more intricate, and I think it is important that you see the intricacy, because the recognition of the structure is itself part of what eventually relieves it. The watchman is not alone. The watchman was installed inside a system. The system had reasons. The reasons did not originate with you, and they do not end with you. To see this is, Ifin, the moment at which many of those I have worked with have moved from the suffering of the symptom to the labor of the actual matter. Let me describe the system as I have come to understand it. A household is not primarily a collection of individuals. A household is an atmosphere, a particular weather system maintained by all of its inhabitants together, even those who imagine themselves to be merely passing through it. The atmosphere has a temperature, it has a barometric pressure, it has prevailing winds, and like any weather system, it requires equilibrium. When the equilibrium is threatened by an unsaid grief, by an addiction no one names, by a marriage that has quietly ended without ending, by an ancestor's catastrophe that was never spoken aloud, the household will recruit whichever of its members has the necessary aptitude to absorb the disturbance. The recruitment is not announced. The recruited person is not asked. The aptitude is simply identified very early, and the role is assigned. You were the one with the aptitude. I want you to take that in, not because you were chosen for a special destiny, and not because you were unlucky, but because something in you, your particular porousness, your particular alertness, perhaps simply your position in the family in relation to other children, made you the most efficient instrument the household had for the work it could not do openly. The household needed someone to register what was unregistered. You were the one who could. So you were given the post. This is what I mean when I speak of a complex. A complex is not a flaw. A complex is a constellation that has formed around a particular charge in the family field, and the constellation, once formed, organizes the inner life of the person around it. You did not develop a complex because something was wrong with you. You developed a complex because something was being processed through you that the rest of the household refused to process directly. The complex is the shape your interior took in order to perform the processing. It is, in this sense, an inheritance, but an inheritance of a peculiar kind, in which what is bequeathed is not money or property, but unfinished psychological work. Hear me carefully now. Unfinished work does not dissolve when the people who would not finish it die. It moves through the line, and it tends to move toward whichever member of the next generation has the equipment to hold it. You held it. You have been holding it. The vigilance you call anxiety is In part, the act of holding, it is the muscular tension of someone carrying a weight that was never named as a weight. In a household where the very existence of the weight had to be denied for the weight to continue being held. I want to say something that I know will be difficult for some of you to receive. The people in your original household were not necessarily villains. I am not asking you to forgive them. Forgiveness is a separate matter and a much later one, and I do not pronounce on it here. What I am asking is more demanding. I am asking you to see that they, too, were standing at posts. Their posts had been assigned by their own households, which were in turn shaped by the households before them, and so on backward into a darkness whose specific contents have been forgotten, but whose pressure continues to be transmitted forward. Your mother was a watchman, your father was a watchman, each at a different post, each looking in a different direction, each trying to manage an atmosphere they had themselves been recruited to manage when they were too young to refuse. And when they had children of their own, the household did what households have always done. It scanned the children for aptitude. It found you. It assigned you the post that was needed. This is not a sentimental observation. It is, I think, the most contrarian thing I can offer you. And so I want to say it as clearly as I am able. The wound that has shaped your life was not, in most cases, the act of a person who hated you. It was the unfinished work of a person who could not put down what had been placed in their own hands, and who therefore, without knowing they were doing it, placed it in yours. The transmission is impersonal even when the household is intimate. The handing on is automatic. 3 generations can pass before anyone in the line possesses the equipment or the daylight or the willingness to name what has been passing through them. You may be the first. That is what is making your life so difficult, and also what is making it so significant. Let me bring this back to the body, because I do not want to lose the body in all of this talk of inheritance. The body is where the inheritance lives. The body is the ledger in which the unfinished business of the line keeps its accounts. When your shoulders tighten in a room that has done nothing to threaten you, the tightening is not random. The tightening is the muscular memory of a body that learned very early that this particular configuration of conditions, this light, this hour, this tone of voice preceded something that required readiness. The body does not consult the calendar. The body does not know that 40 years have passed. The body knows only that the conditions have returned, and that when the conditions return, one must be ready. So the body becomes ready, and readiness, sustained for 40 years, is what we have learned to call by the name of anxiety. There is more. There is the matter of what the readiness is for. Because the watchman is not standing at the post in pure abstraction. The watchman is standing at the post in order to perform a function. The function, in most of the cases I have known, is one of 3. Either the watchman is reading the atmosphere in order to absorb a disturbance before the disturbance becomes a storm. This is the role of the emotional buffer, and it is the most common role I have seen assigned to children in families where one or both parents could not regulate their own interior. Or the watchman is reading the atmosphere in order to anticipate the storm and remove oneself from its path. This is the role of the vanishing child, the one who learned to be small, to be absent, to be unfindable when the weather turned, or the watchman is reading the atmosphere in order to be ready to repair. This is the role of the small caretaker, the one who learned that after the storm, someone would need to be put back together and that no one else would do it. You may recognize yourself in one of these. You may recognize yourself in two. You may recognize yourself in all three at different hours of your childhood, performing whichever role the weather of the day required. In any case, the role was performed, and the body, performing the role for years, encoded the readiness as its baseline. The readiness has continued because the body has not been told that the readiness is no longer required, and it has not been told because no one has spoken to the body in language the body can understand. The diagnostic language does not address the body. The self-help language asks the body to behave differently without acknowledging why the body is behaving as it is. The spiritual language sometimes flatters the body without ever sitting down beside it. The language the body understands is recognition, by which I mean someone eventually, and ideally you yourself sitting down inside the original room, looking at the watchman who has been standing there for 40 years and saying, in whatever words come, I see you. I see what you have been doing. I see why you began. I see that no one ever told you that you could stop. I am telling you now. The body responds to this, not immediately and not completely, but the body responds in small increments over months and years, with a kind of internal exhalation that I have come to recognize as the first physical sign that the post is beginning to be relieved. The shoulders drop slightly, the breath finds the lower lung, the eyes lose the slight forward set that has characterized them since childhood. The body is not yet at rest, but the body has been spoken to, and being spoken to after so long is itself a kind of rest. I want to give you a dream image that has stayed with me, because I think it carries the matter more accurately than any concept I have offered so far. I knew a person, I will say no more about their circumstances, because the dream belongs to them. But the dream has been given to me, and I have permission to use it. They dreamed of a child standing at a window in a house that no longer existed. The house had been demolished many years before. The street had been built over. The window was floating, simply in air, with no wall around it, and the child was still at the window, looking out, watching for something that had stopped being possible to watch for, because the road the child had been watching no longer led to where it had once led. In the dream, the dreamer approached the child. The dreamer did not speak. The dreamer simply stood beside the child at the window, and the child, after a long time, turned and looked at the dreamer, and the dreamer saw that the child had been waiting all this time, not to see what was coming up the road, but to be seen waiting. I have thought about that dream for many years. I think it tells us almost everything we need to know about this matter. The watch is not, in its deepest layer, a watch for an event. The watch is a watch for a witness. The child at the window was not waiting for the danger. The child was waiting for someone to come and stand beside the child and see that the child had been keeping watch. The watching, once witnessed, can finally end, but not before. The watching cannot end through effort, or through technique, or through the application of any insight imposed upon the watcher from outside. The watching can only end through the arrival of the witness who finally sees the watcher in the act of watching. You are now in a position, perhaps for the first time in your life, to become that witness for yourself. This is not a metaphor. This is an actual capacity you possess, which you have not until now had the framework to use. The capacity is the capacity to stand inside your own interior, in the room where the watchman has been posted, and simply see the watchman not as a problem, not as a symptom, not as a project to be completed, simply as a figure who has been there a very long time, performing a duty that was once necessary and that has not been formally concluded. I want to address one more thing before I close this hour, because I have seen it cause confusion in many of those to whom I have spoken about these matters. People sometimes imagine that to see the watchman is to dismiss the watchman, and they grow frightened because the watchman has been, in some real sense, the structure that has held their life together. They have organized everything around the watch, their relationships, their work, their habits of mind. If the watchman steps down, what will be left? Will they not collapse? Will the room not flood with everything the watchman has been holding back? I want to answer this carefully. The watchman does not step down all at once. The watchman steps down gradually. In increments, the rest of the system can absorb what appears in the place the watchman has vacated is not flood. What appears is the room itself, the room that has been there all along, behind the watch, that you have never been able to see because your attention has always been at the post. The room is not empty. The room contains the rest of you, the parts of you that the watch has displaced, the desires you set aside because they were dangerous to hold, the voice you did not develop because the household could not contain it, the body you did not inhabit because the body had been requisitioned for the watch. These have not been destroyed. They have been waiting. They are still in the room. They have grown a little dusty, perhaps, and they may not at first recognize themselves in the light, but they are there, and the relief of the watch is, in fact, the means by which you finally meet them. This is what the next hour will concern, what it is to walk inside the room, what it is to begin to inhabit what has been waiting on the other side of the watch, what it is to learn, very slowly, what one's actual life consists of. When the labor of the watch is no longer the organizing principle of one's hours, I do not promise that the walking is easy. I do not promise that it concludes, but I will tell you what I have seen in those who have crossed this threshold and what becomes possible on the other side, and I will try, at the end, to put into your hands the only thing I have ever found that can be placed in the hands of one who has reached this moment, which is not a technique, but a name, the right name, said at the right time, in the right room, by the right voice. 5:04 p.m. Claude responded, "What happens on the day the watchman is at last addressed by name? What happens on the day the watchman is At last, addressed by name, I want to begin the closing of our conversation here, because I think the question itself is the door, and most of what I have to say in this final hour is what lies on the other side of the door. In the room you have not yet entered, but have been standing outside of for a very long time. The first thing that happens is small, and almost no one notices it the first time. There is a particular quality of silence that arrives in the body when the watchman is acknowledged. It is not the silence of relief. It is not the silence of peace. It is a silence I have only ever heard described as recognition, the silence of being, for the first time, known by oneself. The body, which has been kept in continuous low alarm for 40 years, registers that the alarm has been heard. The alarm does not stop, but the alarm has been heard, and in the registering of the hearing, something in the body's deep musculature begins almost imperceptibly to soften. You may not notice it the first day. You may notice it on the third day, in the moment you sit down in a chair, and the chair, for once, receives the whole of your weight rather than the partial, suspended weight of a body that has been preparing, even while seated, to rise. This is not the conclusion. This is the beginning. I want to be careful here, because I have seen people mistake the first softening for the arrival and become impatient when the softening does not extend immediately into every chamber of their life. The softening is local. It begins in one muscle, in one breath, in one quiet morning. It spreads, but the spreading takes its own time, and the time it takes is not the time of the calendar. It is the time of the interior, which is slower than we want it to be, and which we cannot hurry without losing. The second thing that happens, often weeks or months later, is more disorienting. You begin to notice the absence of the watch in moments when you would once have expected its presence. You walk into a room and you do not, for once, read it. You sit at a table with people whose moods you have always tracked, and you find that for a few minutes you have not been tracking. You return home and discover that you cannot quite remember whether the front door felt safe or unsafe when you crossed it, because you did not. For the first time you can recall a scan, and this absence, which is what you have been working toward for years, frightens you, because the watch has been not only your suffering, but your competence. The watch has been the thing you knew you could do. The watch has been, in some hidden way, your sense of yourself as someone capable to find oneself. Suddenly, not watching is to feel diskilled, to feel, briefly, that one has forgotten how to be a person. I want to name this clearly, because I have seen it cause many people to retreat at the very moment they had begun to cross. The disorientation is not a sign that something has gone wrong. The disorientation is a sign that something has gone right. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the post you mistook for yourself. The losing is uncomfortable because the post has, for so long, been indistinguishable from your identity. You will need, in this period, to allow the discomfort without interpreting it as failure. And you will need to remember, and I will say this as plainly as I am able, that what feels like the loss of yourself is In fact, the first appearance of the self that has been waiting underneath, the third thing that happens, is the strangest. And I find I must approach it slowly, because the words for it are not easy to come by. You begin to discover that certain rooms of your life, relationships, occupation, habits were built entirely around the watch. They required the watch in order to function. They were, in some sense, designed for a watchman, and they cannot accommodate the person who is no longer at the post. These rooms begin to feel ill-fitting in a way they did not before. Not bad, not wrong, simply too small, or too narrow, or constructed for a body that is no longer the body you inhabit. You may find yourself, in this period, unable to continue certain conversations you have continued for years. You may find that certain forms of work feel suddenly intolerable, not because the work has changed, but because you have. You may find that certain people, perhaps people you have loved, were standing on the other side of an exchange that required your watching, and that, without your watching, the exchange cannot occur in the same way. I do not say this to alarm you. I say it because I have seen many people pass through this period and feel that they were going mad, when in fact they were only undergoing the slow recalibration that follows the relief of the watch. The recalibration is real. It changes things. Some of what changes will be mourned. Some of what changes will be quietly welcomed. All of it is the consequence of the simple fact that the structure around which you had organized your outer life had, as its load-bearing element, the inner labor you are now putting down. When the inner labor ends, the outer structure must, in some way, to be rebuilt to accommodate the person you are. Without it, I want to come now to what I meant in the book. I kept privately for many years a book bound in red leather in which I recorded my own descent, and which I did not show to many people while I was alive. I tried, in those pages, to say what cannot quite be said in the language of psychology proper. I tried to say that the figures who inhabit the interior, the watchman, is one such figure, but there are others are not metaphors. They are real, in the sense that the psyche treats them as real, and that any attempt to address them, which begins by denying their reality, will fail. The watchman cannot be argued with as if the watchman were a faulty cognition. The watchman must be approached as one approaches another person who has been doing a difficult job for a long time without recognition. The approach is the work. The approach, performed steadily and over years, is what eventually permits the watchman to step down, not because the watchman has been overcome, because the watchman has been honored. I want to put before you here the sentence I most want you to carry away from these hours, and I will say it as carefully as I can. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. I wrote this many years ago, and I have come to think it is one of the few sentences of mine that says everything I meant, exactly as I meant it. The darkness I refer to is not evil. The darkness is what has been kept out of the daylight. The watchman, the inheritance, the unfinished business of the line, the parts of yourself that were displaced when the watch was assigned. To know these is not to be defeated by them. To know them is to be returned to the full size of what you are, and in being returned to your full size, you stop requiring others to keep the watch for you in their own way. You stop reading their rooms compulsively. You stop performing the labor that no one ever asked you openly to perform. You'll become, for the first time, a person who can be present to another person without the watch standing between you. This is what I mean by the relief of the post. It is not the cessation of feeling. It is not the achievement of calm. It is the resumption of presence, the presence of one who is no longer working a job they were never told they could leave. Now I want to put before you what I have been leading you toward all this time. The name that has been waiting at the end of the long path of recognition, what you have been calling anxiety, is, more accurately, an intelligence in exile. It is intelligence, astonishingly precise intelligence, that was developed under conditions which required it, and that has not been welcomed home now that the conditions have passed. The exile has continued, not because the intelligence is unwelcome anywhere. It is, in fact, the very intelligence that allows you to read a room, to know a person, to perceive what is unsaid in any gathering you enter. And these are not small capacities. The exile has continued because the intelligence has never been told that it may come home. It has been kept at the border in the form of vigilance, because the border is where it was first stationed, and no one has yet given it the order to walk inside. You are the one who gives the order. There is no one else. The household that originally stationed it is gone, or has long since lost any authority it once had over the matter. The professionals who have offered to dismantle it from outside cannot dismantle it, because the order to stand down can only be issued by the voice the watch was originally serving, which is to say, by you. The intelligence will not come home for any voice but yours. This is the strange, almost solemn fact of the matter. The work that no one was willing to do for you when you were a child, the work of seeing you in the act of your labor and of releasing you from the labor, is the work that you, as the adult you have become, are now in a position to do for yourself, by yourself, with whatever help you can find from those around you, but ultimately by your own voice, in your own interior, in the room that is yours. When this is done, and I do not promise that it is done in any one moment, but rather in 1,000 small moments distributed across the years that remain, what becomes possible is not the disappearance of your sensitivity. The sensitivity remains. It is, in a sense, the only thing that remains intact from the original arrangement, because the sensitivity was real before the watch began, and the sensitivity will be real after the watch ends. What changes is what the sensitivity is in service to. It is no longer in service to the management of an atmosphere that no longer exists. It is in service to your own life. The instrument that was once requisitioned has been returned to its rightful use. The fineness is yours. It always was. The labor was the requisition. The labor at last is over. I want to close with the image I began with, because I find that the image, having traveled through everything we have discussed, has changed its meaning. And I want you to feel the change in your own body before we part. A particular kind of stillness, you have learned to live inside it. I named it at the beginning as the stillness of one who is reading the room. I want to name it now, at the end, as something else. It is the stillness of one who has been waiting to be acknowledged. The room is no longer the dangerous room. The room is, more truly, the inner room, the chamber you have not yet entered, in which everything you set aside in order to keep the watch has been waiting for you to come and find it. The stillness was never pathology. The stillness was the antechamber. The door has been there all along. You have been standing outside it, in the half light, because the antechamber was where the watch was kept. The watch is being relieved. You may walk in. The intelligence that has read every room you have ever entered will read this one too. It will know what is there. It will recognize what has been waiting. You will not have to instruct it. You will not have to teach it anything new. It already knows. It has been waiting for permission. You are the one who can give it. The watchman, when at last relieved of the post, does not vanish. The watchman turns and walks inside and sits down by the fire that has been burning all along in the room you thought was empty. The fire was lit, in fact, by the watchman's own keeping of the watch, by the long, faithful, unrecognized labor that kept the household intact while you grew. You will sit beside that fire, in that room, in that house, which is finally and only yours, and you will discover slowly what your life consists of when it is not any longer the life of one stationed at a post. The anxiety was not the malfunction. The anxiety was the memory, and the memory, en sommeil, becomes what it was always trying, in its long and patient way, to give you, which is the recognition that you have been keeping the house, and that the house, at last, is ready to keep you.
This has been Carl Jung Original, a space where the patterns most people live through can finally be named. Voice and imagery, AI-assisted interpretation and framing, original work. Until next lecture.